Good. So let's get this going. Welcome to Reality Check with Rishi. It's Tech Thursday. This is our weekday podcast where we are talking about coronavirus from various standpoints, the good, bad, and the ugly. So the good news is bend it like the Bay Area. It's working here. We are sort of curbing the increment coronavirus cases, whereas New York City, New York area, and many other places around the world, it still continues to rise. So we are doing something right over here in the Bay Area. And so shelter in place is the way to go. So keep doing that. And today, almost 500,000 cases, unfortunately, in the United States, with about 25,000 recoveries, and unfortunately, about 16,000 fatalities from this. So coronavirus has definitely brought us down to our knees. But beyond the health impact on America, we are obviously seeing a lot of economic impacts, and to small businesses, to our working families, and it's actually causing a lot of hardship right now. And unfortunately, it'll get a lot worse over the next few weeks. So phase 3 stimulus funds, we have been talking about this in previous podcast, $454 billion, $350 billion allocated to small businesses, and our venture capital sector is also trying to get a fair share. And there's been a lot of confusion with that, but hopefully that'll come through. Silicon Valley is the 19th largest economy in the world. And so we do need all the stimulus package that can be delivered here to keep this going. And there are sectors in Silicon Valley that are still doing well. The online collaboration companies are doing well. We also have the online education companies that are doing well. And for example, the Sunnyvale startup Cepheid got the 45-minute test kit approved, but unfortunately that was superseded by Abbott Laboratories with their 5-minute test kit. So there is innovation happening. We also have telemedicine, which is going to be a booming business here in Silicon Valley. And we are all going to redefine healthcare with AI, machine learning, all that good stuff. Google's Project Baseline, that was the big news a couple of weeks back. And so they basically offer the COVID-19 risk screening, which had a little bit of, it didn't quite start off the way it was intended. And hopefully it's in a much better shape now. But obviously they rolled it out fairly quickly. And for this pilot, they actually Verily worked with various public health agencies, including the governor's office and the California Department of Public Health. And seems like there is a lot more collaboration that is needed between the public sector and the private sector. And there are countries around the world that are asking the tech industry for help. So in London, last month, actually in March, they were calling for a digital Dunkirk. What exactly is that? So they were referring to a famous World War II battle in which many private ships and ferries they were actually rescuing thousands of Allied troops from Dunkirk, France. And so can Silicon Valley provide the applications to the federal government to, for example, to ensure that money gets to people fairly quickly? Now, we all saw it was a little bit of a debacle playing out with SBA and how the PPP loans and the EIDL loans have been structured. You know, the website was very quirky, it was crashing. So Silicon Valley, if it was engaged for these types of purposes, it would be very successful, I believe, based upon our track record of getting things done. So anonymized health, electronic medical records, for example, that would be huge. These are some areas that would essentially be helpful with COVID-19. So in conclusion, there is a lot of synergies between the public sector and the private sector. And if we had the trifecta of issues with the technology, with science, and with policies, then we could really impact and address these types of challenges in the long run. And a crisis like COVID-19 would sort of be hopefully dissipated a lot more quickly. And I say that, but technology has a major role to play. And I think the story is yet to be written on this. So today I'm very delighted to invite Navin Chaddha. He is the managing director at Mayfield Fund. And we'll talk about these types of challenges and see how we can converge with a forward-looking story for Silicon Valley. Because obviously, we have a track record, and this COVID-19 is essentially creating a bunch of different opportunities for us. So Navin needs no introduction. He graduated from IIT Delhi, magna cum laude, and during his PhD at Stanford, he founded this company, which was basically brought by Microsoft, and that is the Windows Media Player. And he's a serial entrepreneur living the Silicon Valley dream and finding tremendous success as the managing director at Mayfield. So welcome, Navin. How are you today? How's it going?
It's going good. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, we can hear you well. And so to the audience here, we are going to have questions following this, like a little conversation that we'll have with Navin on different topics that pertains to Silicon Valley. And we would love to have sort of like an active dialogue where you jump in and ask questions. So for now, if you don't mind putting your questions in the chat window, and we'll try to run through as many as we can. I know Navin is a busy man, so he'll stay as long as he can with us. We are actually very happy to have Navin's time today. So Navin, tell us about, we here in a crisis, there's a lot of pivoting that is going on. People are discovering a new self within. And so is there anything going on with you as you shelter in place? Any specific pivoting you're doing? Are you exploring anything new and interesting, exciting, or is it just business as usual? Love to hear about that.
Absolutely. So I won't say it's business as usual. I think the most important thing that has at least hit me is we have entered a new reality where there are things beyond our control, where we need to react in real time. Companies talk about disaster recovery and business continuity. I think the COVID-19 situation has hit every human being at a personal level. Yeah. And we need our own strategies on how we battle this thing first, because it's hitting us from an emotional and a mental perspective. And then how do we give back to others to essentially help them with what they're going through? So I would say it's not business as usual. It's hitting individuals hard, it's hitting the community hard, and it's hitting startups and companies hard. So the question is, if that's a given, what do we do about it and how do we come out of it? So that's where at least myself and my team at Mayfield with our entrepreneurs have been spending time. That yes, this has happened. So what do we do from here?
So Navin, what's the silver lining with this, in terms of, we see a lot of a mind shift currently happening, where families are bonding together and discovering things that they had completely forgotten. And the shelter in place is essentially leading to, for example, the cleansing of the planet Earth that is happening. We read lots of stories. There are skies that are much more blue now, and the pollution has cleared up. So, amidst all this, what are you seeing? Is the world going to be the same, or what kind of a shift is happening? Or what kind of a new reality are we going to see? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I would say the world will get to the same. It's a matter of time, right? And that time is debatable. Is it 12 months, 6 months, 24 months? But a few things will change. So what I would say is, with what's happened with the COVID-19 situation, how people work in a distributed environment, in a remote environment, is going to be a way of the future. This was already happening with companies being built, not only in Silicon Valley, but having distributed teams. But now this is going to be the new reality. And I would call it the concept of a virtual company, where you'll just get used to not being in the same location. You'll be selling virtually, you'll be supporting virtually, and the rise of the online world is just going to precipitate and grow like anything. As far as startups are concerned, I think capital is going to be king, and companies which can focus and will have the capital will come out stronger. And as you mentioned earlier, I see a few sectors that will boom. So any company which is working on the future of work, especially with remote technologies and collaboration technologies. There'll be rise in telehealth. There'll be need for new kinds of cybersecurity offerings, because as you build a distributed workforce, everybody is not within the same corporate campus. So there'll be need for more and more innovation on the cybersecurity front. And then as engineering biology, which is at the intersection of engineering and IT, with all the work that has happened in computational biology, companies are going to go solve problems for planetary and human health. So I see a lot of possibilities and a lot of innovation, because at the end of the day, necessity is the motherhood of all invention. Whether it's Silicon Valley or the world, people are not sitting calm. There's just work happening to solve the problems we are facing today.
Correct, Naveen. In adversity, we find opportunities. And that's what every Silicon Valley startup is sort of engaged to see how they can solve some problems and make a difference with this crisis that we are all sort of going through. So that brings me, what you said, you're talking about how companies will invest and how we will look at different areas of problems we are going to solve. Let's talk about Mayfield. You guys celebrated 50 years of tremendous success. And so how do you see yourself evolving? What are the different areas that you're looking to invest for the future? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, our motto over the last 50 years has been people first investing. And we have a strong belief that we need to invest in people first and their ideas second, because people build products, products don't build people. And if you back and partner with great people, their initial idea may not pan out, but they'll quickly pivot to find the right idea and the right market opportunity. So as far as our thesis areas are concerned, I would say there are a few areas, and I might be repetitive with what I said earlier. So we're big believers in the future of work with distributed and remote teams. We are looking at opportunities at the intersection of biology and technology. We're looking at applications of human-centered AI. We're big believers in the renaissance of silicon. Newer companies, whether it's Nuvia in our portfolio or Fungible or other AI and ML semiconductor companies, are bringing silicon back to the Silicon Valley. And then I would say user-centric privacy and security is going to be a booming area in this new world. So we are pretty bullish about what the future holds. And as far as our fund is concerned, we just announced a couple of big backs. We raised $750 million in new capital. $475 million of that is focused on investing in early stage companies, which is primarily companies at an idea stage or an early product phase. And then we have an early growth fund of $275 million, which is again looking for companies not at the ideation stage, but an early growth stage where they have some product market fit and some repeatability in their go-to-market motion. So we are pretty bullish on the long term and believe there's going to be a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs to go create companies.
Yeah, that's definitely a very bullish outlook, Naveen. And, something you mentioned that caught my attention was bringing silicon back to Silicon Valley. And, there has been a lot of talk about, how our position is sort of compromised a little bit with how the manufacturing has shifted to China. And over the last couple of decades, few decades, I would say, we have seen that shift happen. And now with, especially with the reliance upon, for example, raw materials to manufacturing our drugs, the reliance upon China has been perceived as a huge handicap for us. Any specific comments you would like to offer on that, Naveen?
So I would say, first and foremost, right, like the world is global. You need to find the best talent and the best set of people, whichever part of the world they are in. So you don't need to just look at it as a cost-cutting measure, but you need to look at, if you're building a virtual company, how does your supply chain look? And I think over-relying on just one country or one region is a mistake. So as far as pharmaceuticals is concerned or semiconductors is concerned, it's not just going to be manufactured in one area now. This is going to be a global opportunity, whether it's nearshore for countries like Mexico or for countries like Canada, or even there's going to be repurposing of stuff like what Tesla has done to be bringing manufacturing back to the United States. And I see more and more of that coming.
Yep, yep, we can see that trend already for sure. So let's talk about the venture capital sector of Silicon Valley. You know, Treasurer Secretary Munchkin, he basically said that initially we would allow the venture capital sector to derive the benefits of the stimulus package, $350 billion. That was a lot of money. And then we saw a little seesaw, you know, where it was like, okay, they will have it, they will not have it. So what specific help? You know, I mean, you have a deep understanding of our venture capital investments and the ecosystem that we have here. So from your vantage point, Navin, you know, what kind of a help do we need from the feds to see how we can bail out Silicon Valley quickly? You know, any insights you would like to share?
Yes, I think there's still confusion on how do venture finance companies fit into the situation we are in, because a lot of them already have capital. And the important thing is it a necessity for them to be able to get this kind of a loan from the SBA? And I would say every company doesn't qualify, but there will be companies which are in dire needs, have no access to capital, or have had financings fall through. I think they can qualify for this stuff. But if there are companies sitting with 12 months of cash, 18 months of cash, 24 months of cash, it's going to be harder for them to go appeal and say like, hey, I'm in crisis. I need help, when small businesses in Main Street America don't even have money to essentially open the shop. So I think it's a healthy balance. I would say every startup is not going to qualify. If there is a dire need and you can prove that why it is necessary to sustain operations, right? Everybody is cutting. Reduction in forces are happening. Spending on marketing is going down. So I would say some startups would qualify. And I think the banks and the Fed are doing their best to understand through the Small Business Administration and other things how this can be done. But I think the onus is on the VCs, and the onus is on entrepreneurs who have been funded by venture capital to figure out, with help of their boards and their advisors, whether they should be even applying for this thing first and foremost.
Yeah. Okay. So that brings me to the corollary. You know, essentially, you know, Silicon Valley has sort of done well without too much support from the public sector, because the best of minds, the best of brains, the best of talents from all across the world flock here. And they have created an ecosystem which allows entrepreneurs, the ones who are hungry, to really succeed. But do you think, like from an overall standpoint, not right now, but do you think that if there was some perceived help from the public sector, from the government, would that make it a little easier? You know, any thoughts you would like to share with that?
Yeah, I would say help is always welcome. And I think everybody can benefit from that. The issue will be, does Silicon Valley need help, or does Detroit need help, or does the Midwest need help, right? So I'm not in a position to comment about that, but I think public-private cooperation and private government collaboration through help with people like you and others can certainly benefit. So I would say there are certain areas. Let's look at travel and hospitality. Let's look at sharing economy, where there's transportation, or there is like Airbnb or Lyft or Uber. These companies had given jobs to a lot of people. And now with the downturn and what's happening with the shelter in place, they're hurting. So again, they can be certain kind of companies where the public sector can work with the private sector. And similarly, government can come in and help these companies figure things out.
Makes sense. Makes complete sense. So let's talk about, you know, going back to where we are today. how can we get through this crisis with minimal disruption? Any specific thoughts you have given to this topic? How long will this last? How will we get through it? Seems like we are obviously not seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. So let's hear it from you.
Yeah. So I think as far as it relates to startups, right? I would say everybody needs to create a focus and move. The leaders of these companies need to move from a peacetime CEO or a peacetime founder mentality to a wartime CEO and a wartime CEO mentality, right?
Yeah, sure.
We are in crisis and it cannot be status quo. So first and foremost, I would say once you change your mindset, the next thing you need to do is you need to focus, because startups, even in good times, die of indigestion. They don't die of starvation. So you have to look at things which don't matter. They have to just go. They have to just go, if you will. The next thing I would say is you need to make sure the product or service you're offering is a painkiller. It's not a vitamin, which means it needs to be the must-have for your customer, whether it's a consumer, whether it's a business. Everything you do, you need to keep people in mind, because as a leader and as a startup, you need to promote empathy, because that's going to be extremely important. And finally, you need to take a long view and be optimistic that you're running a marathon and not a sprint. So I think if we can, as leaders, as entrepreneurs, as venture capitalists, take a long-term perspective and focus on that and make sure we manage our burns and we manage our growth, that we keep profitability in mind, is the most important thing. And at least what I'm telling my entrepreneurs and Mayfield is telling our portfolio companies, there's only one thing you can control, which is the money you spend, which is your cost structure. So
right.
Take control of that, because what revenue growth you're going to have this year, how many customers you're going to get, we just don't know.
Yep.
We just don't know when the budgets will come back. So the message out there for people is control your own destiny and focus on what matters and let the rest go.
Yep, for sure. A lot of operation optimization, creating an optimal way to move forward, and also a long-term thinking is how these companies will have to survive. So when you look at that, brings me to how exactly some of these startups are going to survive, but also what about startups that are going to be born, right? I mean, what are you seeing in terms of, there are big challenges on hand, but it's also an opportunity. So what sectors do you believe are going to thrive going forward? Would you like to talk? I think you touched upon it a little bit, but perhaps you want to add something to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say crisis, first and foremost, is an opportunity for the bold. It's time to lean forward. And if you are a student of history, you'll realize that some of the best companies in the world were creating during very tough times. And if you look at whether it was General Electric after the Great Depression, Hewlett Packard after the Second World War, Amgen after the 1980 recession, Cisco after the 1987 stock market crash, and Google after the 2000 internet bust. And the reason I say why it's a great time, because if you have a great idea and if you can get financing, there's going to be less companies and less startups which are going to be funded. Big companies are going to be cutting costs. They're not going to be innovating at the pace they used to innovate. And then finally, you're going to have access to talent. It's like really, really hard to hire people in Silicon Valley because the salaries have skyrocketed. People are moving out. So it's a great time to be a founder. And as I mentioned earlier, the trends remain the same. I think we have seen the success of Zoom. We have seen the success of Slack. So how do people work in a distributed and remote environment is important. We're very bullish on the applications of biology for planetary health and human health. Big believers in artificial intelligence, big believers in cybersecurity offerings, whether for physical or digital world. And physical is going to become more and more important because it's an ignored area from the past. And then I would say user-centric privacy. Silicon Valley hasn't done much and is becoming mainstream and important because if you look at the social platforms we use or even the application we are on right now, who knows what's happening with our data?
Correct. Yeah. So Navin, this brings me to my very last question, and we would love to see if there are any questions. I see that the chat window has been active, and yeah. So well, we don't see any. Well, I see. Okay, I see a couple questions. So my last question is about, you talked about the access to talent, and let's talk a little bit about that. So when we see how in the last few years, when we look at 2015, the year 2015, we had about a net 2,000 people moving into Silicon Valley every month. And then in 2017, a net 2,000 people a year were leaving Silicon, actually 3,000 people a year were leaving Silicon Valley a year. So that's like change. It has changed dramatically. And compared to like 2,000 people a month coming into Silicon Valley in 2015, now we have 3,000 people a year leaving Silicon Valley a net. So it's a huge shift that has happened because it's the quality of life. It's been impacted. We have a huge challenge with housing. We have a transportation gridlock that plays out every rush hour, which we are obviously not seeing today, which is probably the one thing good about this, the shelter in place that we have today. But, there is a talk about building more and more housing, about going up. But what if we did that, it would impact the quality of life. And we have seen that in different parts of the world where the population has exploded and the quality of life has been impacted drastically. So what if we expanded out Silicon Valley into other far-flung areas? When you look at, let's say, Sacramento, Modesto, Stockton, Fresno, Bakersfield, even, and we built out a high-speed transportation grid that connects some of these far-flung cities with Silicon Valley. And now you have created affordable housing. And hopefully, as the population spreads out, young engineers would actually do a startup in Stockton. Any take in terms of, would you like to see a future of Silicon Valley like this? And we see that in many parts of the world where they have actually done that, versus would you like to see high density housing right here? And that would create like a compressed ecosystem that might hopefully still expand out the economy, but with the quality of life impacts. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I would say that's a matter of more of personal taste, but I think Silicon Valley needs to do everything to be still intaking people. And your question on expanding the radius of Silicon Valley, I think you're heading in the right direction. And the main reason is it's hard anyways to work 4 hours away, 6 hours away, 12 hours away, and different time zones. But if you're in the same time zone, I don't think you even need to commute. With the way new technologies for collaboration and remote work are happening, a lot of the work can be done where people in Richmond or in Sacramento or the areas you mentioned don't even need to drive to Mountain View. So I would say besides transportation, the need is more in the mindset of the entrepreneurs and the companies that it is possible to build a remote first company. And there are many examples in our portfolio, like HashiCorp, which is a company which is doing extremely well, 700 plus employees. It's a completely distributed company with 40 plus locations, and only 10% of them are in San Francisco. So I think that's the mindset one needs to take, whether it has to be a boundary-less organization, right? It has to be a remote first company, if you will. So I would say it's not just the radius of Silicon Valley, it's the notion of a virtual company. And
Correct.
That's the new reality we are going to be in.
Absolutely. I think that is definitely defining a new reality in the context of coronavirus. There is a before story and there will be an after story that will play out. And we can keep talking with Navin for there are too many issues that we can talk about, but why don't we run through and see if there are any specific questions? And let's start with Let's see. Let's start with Ashok. Ashok, are you still on? Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question? Okay, let's go to Naresh.
Hello, can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just curious if Mr. Navin can shed some light on how VC funds like his and others in the Valley can actually help out promising portfolio companies whose product launches have been delayed because of the COVID-19 situation. They're unable to reach out as many customers as they would like. Obviously, they can't fly around with demos and all that. And so they may be having promising technology. They're probably a little bit closer to the end of their runway. So what are your folks' thoughts on that? Instead of running to the government for help, will the VCs themselves be able to extend a helping hand of some sort?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say our responsibility first and foremost is to our existing portfolio of investments. And VC firms like us, which have been in business for over 50 years, right, and have seen many ups and downs, we're doing everything to help our companies, whether it's getting them access to customers, whether getting them virtual briefings with CIOs, CMOs, CROs, and even figuring out how we help them extend their runway. And all that work has been happening over the last 4 weeks, and I see it continuing for the next 3 to 6 months. And I think VCs need to certainly step up and help. The question will be, what if it's not our portfolio company? Then what do you do? And that has to go through the new investment process. But I think this is the time, like entrepreneurs take leadership, for VCs to take leadership, because it is only an opportunity for the bold, and you need to double down. And it's time to lean forward, as fear is the only thing that limits one potential. So I would say, like, we are just leaning in and leaning forward and are not fearful of what's happening. It's time to double down and help companies because they can come out as winners.
So that is a good segue to the next question from Dave Eddings. Dave, could you please unmute yourself and ask the question? Dave, you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I mean, my question was more or less answered earlier in terms of how we see the expansion of perhaps the 21 counties. My curiosity is, do we see any long-term impacts on the Valley in terms of, this new sort of remote approach?
I think it can only get better. And the reason is, if you look at the productivity, right? Like, let's look at any of us, like, who are local folks in Saratoga or on the South Bay, to go to San Francisco in the morning, right? Like, if you're driving, like, best of luck, it's 1.5 to 2 hours. All this has to change because a lot of people I know who live in the South Bay won't work for a San Francisco company. The people who live in San Francisco cannot work for a company in San Jose. And with this new reality, I think the job opportunities for people, if companies endorse, which they will, telework, if they endorse work from home, the opportunities that are available to employees is going to be 10x of what they used to be, because people can only spend so much time in the car or in trains because they need to have some balance. They have families. So I see this as a huge opportunity once the markets start getting back, that since people would have learned how to work in this new reality, there'll only be better opportunities for people where they don't have to drive 50 miles, 1.5 to 2 hours in traffic each way.
Yep, I totally agree with that. Let's go to seemingly a Ms. Naresh. Naresh Batra, could you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, Rishi. Yeah, Navin, in the light of the changed landscape and environment, and you highlighted which companies in the future will grow, how is your portfolio looking? Are you going to be giving it a new litmus test, and which company you're going to fund further and which company you're going to drop? And are you already going through this exercise?
Yeah, so I would say we started that exercise on March 6th and got a pretty good hang of our 60 plus active portfolio companies. That doesn't include seed stage companies, that would make it like 75, and figured out, right, like which are the companies which are going to make it through this environment. And I would say where we are sitting today, around 75% of our companies have more than 18 months of cash. And there are companies which have like 3 months of cash, and we're trying to figure out what does their situation look like. And I think to me, cash is critical, and there will be some casualties, but our aim is how do at least 90% of the companies get on the other end? Because if there is no need for your product and the markets don't improve, then you need to essentially downsize and mothball and wait for the markets to recover. So my hope is if 90 to 95% of the companies can survive, we're doing very well.
Okay, makes sense. Thanks.
Hey, Rishi, you're on mute.
Oh, I was speaking on mute. So that was a good question, Naresh. Let's go to Vipul. Vipul, would you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
we
I
can hear
can.
you.
So, I mean, apart from product companies, what is your advice for IT service companies in this environment? I mean, how can they benefit from or, you know, be aware of or prepare for in this environment?
And this is IT services companies which are near shore or which also have offshore development centers?
Yeah, which have also offshore development centers.
So I think it's a huge opportunity because when companies are going to be reducing cost, there is going to be a need for globalization of talent. And with this whole telework and remote work, a lot of the companies which just were working from 1 or 2 locations are going to start exploring global development centers. So I see this as only an opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the second thing I would say is these companies should start figuring out how they can be on top of the new technologies which are getting in the market to be remote first companies, where it's not just about cost. What can they do to get into the development life cycle of their customers? So can they innovate and integrate forward into the development environments of their customers? So I would say it's both cost and talent, but also can they do some process reengineering or adopt certain new technologies which makes it completely seamless.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, so
Hey, Rishi, can I ask a follow-up question to this services?
Naresh, would you please hold on and let's just run through all the questions and then we'll circle back to you if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so we have Megha who's got a question. Megha, would you please unmute
Yeah,
yourself?
hi. Thank you, Rishi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Hi, Navin. So my question was on remote learning. So remote learning is the present need of the hour, as we all know. And we haven't seen too much innovation in this space as much as we would like it to be. There's no one streamlined solution for remote learning. People are using a lot of portals. Do you think the space has been neglected? And two, what would your strategy be to invest in this space, considering the fact that there could be a possible collaboration with the public sector?
Yeah, so I would say there've been a lot of e-learning companies or remote learning companies that were funded a decade back. And some of them had good outcomes and some of them are still public companies. The problem with most of the companies which were consumer focused, besides online universities, was you get a customer to do an online course and they never come back. So it's like being an online merchant. You sell a product once and they never come back. So that's why the funding had dried out. And then as far as the businesses was concerned, companies which were selling to other businesses, there are companies which are established public companies which are doing well. So I think there is need. The question is, what's the offering you can do and how can you have a business model where there is continuity? So let's look at kids education, right? The company in India, Baiju, is doing extremely well because you can get a student in 3rd grade, 4th grade, and the student will continue with you.
Sorry to interrupt. What is the company name?
Baiju,
Okay.
right? Like they're very, very big in India, and you can see their advertising on cricket and all over the place, right? But I'm saying if you can find out a business model where it's not one time, whether it's for training or remote learning. So for example, kids education, you get a kid in 2nd or 3rd grade and grow with them to 12th grade and even universities. So that can become extremely interesting if you can serve the customer longer than just once, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Good. Let's go to Tapan. Tapan, would you please unmute your...
Hi, thanks, Rishi. Hi, Navin. So quick question on like the spending of the startups. Unfortunately, because of the situation, like most of the startups now will expect to spend more on growth. I mean, what do you suggest the VC strategies will be helping these startups or recommending them? What's the right way to grow? Is it more revenue focused, or are we going to be realistic about the salaries of the people back like 10 years ago in the Bay Area?
Yeah, so I would say, as I mentioned earlier, I think the most important thing first and foremost is having runway so that when the markets recover and there's a possibility for 70, 80, 100% growth, companies are around. So people need to get fitter, right? Like companies need to get fitter and get rid of the stuff which is not needed. And I would say, yes, growth is important, but that's in the long run. This year is a wash. It really doesn't matter, right? Like whether a company grows 10%, a private company, 30%, 40%, negative 10%, it doesn't matter. What matters is, are you taking care of things that you're going to be around 3 to 5 years from now? So I would say the emphasis is not going to be anymore to grow at all costs. The emphasis is going to be whether your business has repeatability, whether you have the right metrics in place to be a long-term sustainable business which can run without venture money.
Okay, thank you.
So, so this was good piece of advice. So Navin, let's wrap this up. Looks like there are no more questions. So what's your final word of advice to startups that are looking to scale perhaps, or new startups that are going to be launched in this, let's call it a recession for now, and it could very well become a depression for all you know. So the situation is very dire, but there is obviously an opportunity. So any words of advice from you as we wrap up this?
Yeah, I mentioned some of them during the conversation, right? But if I had to summarize, I would say first and foremost, crisis is an opportunity for the bold. Company building is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And this is a time to lean forward, as fear is the only thing that can limit one's potential. Even though we are in crisis, I think we need to move forward together to come out of it and come out as winners.
That's great. Navin, I did forget Naresh. Naresh, are you still there? Would you like to chime in? One last question.
So Navin, I have a company, services-oriented company offshore. You just mentioned that the companies here to reduce costs will be looking for talent outside. My biggest challenge has been the Silicon Valley companies have migrated to the digital transformation. And in my mind, the digital transformation is AI, machine learning, deep learning, business intelligence, blockchain. And I find that that's the talent we have it missing. A lot of the companies here hire local people because they themselves don't know how to define the products. So what would you recommend? I am the only one who has written papers, given talks, and really educated myself in this new wave of digital transformation. How do I educate? Because all the engineers in India still are into the basic coding. They are going in the area of Pythons and JavaScripts and all those things. But they have failed to migrate to this next wave of digital transformation. So what will be your recommendation?
So a few things come to mind, right? One topic would be invest in remote learning. There is a lot of online courses available where you can have your employees get trained on these things. The second thing I would say is, with talent being available in Silicon Valley, get one person who's an expert in AI and train 50 people in your team in India or wherever your remote location is. So that's what you'll have to do. You'll have to forward integrate, have people on your team who understand those technologies, who go and train the next 50. And then those 50 will train the next 50, if you will. So I would say, one, depend upon remote technologies and remote learning and online courses. And then the second thing is hire people here who are training your people and educating them in India.
Yep, definitely.
No, that's I'm doing personally, but that's a very difficult task to go there and spend a lot of time. But anyway, that's a good suggestion. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, but it can be done remotely, Naresh, right? Like, and you can send me an email. I can point you to what some of our companies have done, where they have people here whose job is to educate folks, not physically, but virtually in India. Just drop me an email and I can connect you to some of the best practices people have been doing.
And I did that recently. I trained a team in robotic process automation, and that really paid off big time. And we are engaged with a customer with a big, big opportunity right now.
So that's exactly what makes Navin a great resource for everybody here in Silicon Valley. He's willing to mentor, he's willing to coach, he's willing to guide, and he's willing to make suggestions. So Navin, it was fabulous to have you. And like you said, I think there is a tremendous opportunity. There is a huge amount of morphing that will happen over the next few months. And if a company like Naresh Batra's is willing to make an investment, if they have the ability and capability to make an investment, the sky is the limit. There's a huge opportunity waiting out there. And there are problems that have emerged right now. And if we can converge our resources to help out and address these types of problems, the sky is the limit in terms of how these companies can grow. Google, obviously, like Naresh said, came out in the 2000 downturn that we experienced, and look where Google is today. So it's a great story. I mean, still Silicon Valley is going to be there no matter what happens, and the trajectory will always be up and up because we have the best of talents here, and there are people like Navin who are willing to mentor and coach startups, so willing to coach the new entrepreneurs who come to the Valley, flocking with the dreams of the gold rush. So thank you all for joining in. Great questions. And Navin, really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man, so thank you for taking the time.
Absolutely.
All right.
Pleasure is all mine. Thanks, Rishi.
Thank you, Navin.
Thank you.
Please do share your email IDs so that we can have further interaction.
Absolutely. We'll work through Rishi. But mine is pretty simple, navin@mayfield.com. NAVIN@mayfield.com.
Perfect. Thank you, Navin, for sharing your email address.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the evening, and we'll have many more exciting discussions like these. So come back to Reality Check with Rishi. It's Monday through Friday at 6:30 p.m. Tomorrow, we are doing a youth town hall meeting with a bunch of Silicon Valley youth who are going to be talking about policy questions and discussions, just like we talked about the transportation and housing policy that kind of came into and intersected with tech today. So we'll drill down into many more of these types of issues. Thank you all, and enjoy. Bye.
Okay.
Thanks.
Good evening. Bye. Have a nice day.
You too.